Hello my friends, I'm Sarah, welcome to Grace in My Space. Today, we're getting back to some DIY in our home renovation. I'm in the basement, it's still ripped up. We have painters coming this week, we have flooring going in the next week. There's a lot that's gonna be happening down here. But today, I'm gonna show you how to stain a door. Here a red oak solid core door. This is for our bathroom laundry room combo. It's a pocket door, and I have zero lights in this entire house, so I'm set up next to our slider and we're just going with natural light today. Let me show you what you're going to need for this project. All right, let's walk through the materials very quickly. I use a pre-stain. This helps condition the wood. It's also going to raise the grain so that you can sand it smooth, and that will give you the best uniform finish for your stain once you get to that step. An alternative is just to wipe it down with water. Again, I'm using red oak, and when you add moisture to red oak and to a lot of different woods, it raises that grain up and it will create a poor finish for your stain if you don't sand it down first. So pre-stain wood conditioner, excellent product to use. Vinyl gloves, any kind of gloves, dish gloves, whatever, but you do want some dexterity. You don't want it to be really bulky and cumbersome. And then sandpaper, I'm gonna use 220 grit between my coats. Tack cloth is preferred, but I also sometimes just use my husband's old worn out work undershirts, which work great too. Your choice of staining application method. Today I'm going to use a staining pad, have this so that it's easy to dip the stain into it, but in the past I've usually just brushed it on and then wiped it down. So I don't know if I'm going to like this specific application method just yet, but if not, trusty old brush works great. You'll finish with your stain of choice and then top it off with a polyurethane. So that is our materials needed. Let's get to work. Since my door was raw, straight from the manufacturer, I did a really quick, light hand sanding out in the garage just to knock off any high edges. Then we brought it in and we got our workstation set up. This is going to be one of the biggest time savers for you in this entire process. If you drill small pilot holes in the bottom and top rails on each corner, then this gives you a place for you to insert screwdrivers or other long pins, which gives you the opportunity to flip your door so you can work on both sides without having to wait for the first side to dry. Then I went ahead and cleaned everything up to prepare the surface for the next steps. So to this point, I have hand sanded, just a pre-hand sand. I have vacuumed all the sawdust, run tack cloth over it, and now we're ready for the pre-conditioner. It's a very, very liquidy product, but it's going to help any stain go on really evenly, avoid blotchiness. It's going to control the raised grain, but then it will raise the grain to some extent so that you can sand it back down smooth. And it'll give you a really good start and foundation to your door. Now with every single step, you're going to apply with the grain. Never go against the grain for sanding, for applying your conditioner, for staining. If you go against the grain, it will not turn out as nice. We're gonna just do this really fast because there's nothing overly fancy about applying this wood conditioner. Just wanna get it on there. Allow it to penetrate for a few minutes and then wipe off any excess. You don't want to let your excess dry because that will actually be counterproductive and will create splotchiness. Erin and I just flipped this door. I'm going to do the opposite side, and the benefit of putting the pilot holes into the ends of the doors and either using really long bolts or pins. We have stuck screwdrivers in there, which actually works really, really nice because then you have a handle. The benefit of that is that instead of waiting for every single coat to dry, now we can apply both coats. They can both be drying at the same time, and it's gonna cut this project in half. You want to make sure and touch every surface of the wood with your preconditioner. every little groove. Make sure and do the sides, tops and bottoms, because everywhere that you're going to put stain, you want to also put the wood conditioner. If you don't, then the places that you have put the wood conditioner will stain differently than the places that you haven't, and that will result in a splotchy door. So make sure that you're touching every surface of wood that's going to be stained with every other product that you're using on any other parts of the door. And also make sure you're doing really long, smooth brush strokes. Don't do a lot of start and stop, because that will show through, especially once you get to the staining step.
After your wood conditioner is fully dry, give it a light sanding with 120 grit sandpaper, making sure to always go with the grain of the wood. You can either hand sand or use an electric sander on this process. After you're done sanding every surface, making sure to get into all of the nooks and crannies, you'll go ahead and clean that back up, get it all the way lint-free, dust-free, and then you're ready to start staining. Make sure to always stir your stain rather than shaking.
Now we're moving on to the staining step. You definitely want to wear gloves for this one, preferably ones that don't rip just by putting them on. Apparently I bought the cheapos, so I'm going to double up. You always want to start with a test spot, because it would be a sad, sad day if you put, a swipe of your brush or your rag and then did not like the color. You'd have to kind of start all over in that spot, sand it back down, and that would just delay your project. So you can apply your stain, I said earlier, with your method of application. A lot of people like to use a brush, a lot of people like to use a rag. I'm using these staining pads for the first time, so verdict will be at the end of this video whether or not I like these better than my traditional simple rag. And safety tip, when you are staining, whatever you use, whether it's a rag or a staining pad, make sure that you unfold it, don't crumple it up, lay it flat outside to dry. If you crumple it up and throw it in the trash, it could start on fire, and nobody wants that. So I'm gonna do my test spot on an edge. It's really the most inconspicuous place I have. Buddy, that's dark. Ooh. Ooh, I like that.
If your door has panels, I like to start the staining process in the panel and then finish with the stiles in the rails. Make sure and do long, even strokes, making sure to get all of the corners and the tiny crevices filled well, and then feather it out really lightly.
I'm gonna come back with a dry one and wipe off that excess after just a few minutes. The longer you leave it on, the darker the stain will penetrate. I'm not impressed with these staining pads. They're falling apart. Oh my gosh, the color is so good.
After the first coat, you can assess how saturated your color is. I love the way that this came out with just one coat, so I will not be doing another. But at this point, you're going to let your door fully dry before the next step.
All right, I'm out of light, but next step is going to be letting the stain fully dry and then applying 2 to 3 coats of poly, sanding between coats. Now there's a few different methods of sanding. You can either do 2 coats and then do sand and then your final coat, or you can sand between every coat. It will depend on your situation, how raised your grain was, how rough your door is. You want to make it as smooth as possible, obviously. And so next up, we'll get to polying. The door has dried overnight, which is not necessarily needed, but that's all the daylight that I had to work with. So now, day 2, I'm putting on this Varathane poly. It's a matte finish, which I prefer, but you can get all the way up to a full gloss. What you want to make sure and do with your poly is sand in between coats, but also this is where it's extremely important to use very long brush strokes and never start a new stroke in wet poly. And I'll show you what I mean by that, because if you do, you're going to mess up the finish and you're going to be able to see each brush stroke start and stop, which is not what you want to do at this stage of the project, having to start all back over. Now, one thing to remember, never shake your stain or your poly. Make sure and stir it really well. If you shake it, you're gonna create air bubbles, which will then be transferred to your piece. You do not want that. So we're gonna start with really long, even strokes with the grain. This particular one goes on milky and dries clear. And this is what I want to make sure you know. If you get that far, and then you start a brush stroke right here, when this dries, you're gonna see all of these transitions from one brush stroke to the next. So when you're doing this, make sure you have enough on your brush to go from the beginning of your door piece all the way to the opposite end in one long stroke, feathering out as you go the entire length of that specific part of the door that you're working on. I like to just kind of feather out all the way back and forth at the end, and then make sure and catch any drips that you've created in the corners, and then make sure that you're feathering out those edges where you've gone cross grain, because that will be visible if you don't do so. And then just apply it to your entire piece, making sure not to oversaturate these corners. This one I got a little bit too much in, and now it's pooling, so you need to feather that out so that you don't have big globs of poly. You're also going to make sure to do the tops and bottoms down here. This will help seal it so that you don't have any expansion and contraction. And I'm going to need to move my sawhorse a little bit away from here, but make sure you do the tops, bottoms, and sides as well.
If you're new to staining, one thing I would recommend is just testing out your staining applicators on a scrap piece of wood. As you could see in my staining portion of this process, I did not like those staining pads. I would have preferred to use a rag or a brush instead, but you may like staining pads for your project. So just test out the varying options and see which one works best for you.
Now we're gonna do, my first coat of poly is dry. We're gonna do a quick hand sand with 220. And this is just a really light sanding. Again, only with the grain, and it's just gonna take out some of the impurities and imperfections from any dust or particles that had settled from your poly. The door is sanded, vacuumed, cleaned with a tack cloth. No dust particles left on it from the sanding process, because that would just negate the whole purpose of what we're doing. And now we're going to put another coat of poly on. You can do 2 to 3 coats of poly depending on your recommendation from the product that you're using. I'll link up all the products that I used on this door in the description below. And we're going to get this final coat of poly on, let it set the appropriate amount of time, and then get it hung.
After everything was fully dry, our contractor hung the pocket door for us and installed the hardware, and I love how it turned out. Oak is such a beautiful wood, and highlighting it with this darker wood stain really brings out all of the grain and all the detail of the door. I styled up our back entrance with some simple things I had on hand, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Now, I will say that one mistake I told you not to make, I actually made on this door, so I can show you how it looks. I accidentally sanded cross grain at the top of the door, and so you can see here, this is what happens when you do that. The stain grabs those scratches and it's very visible, so make sure to avoid that step. Otherwise, I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I can't wait to show you the full bathroom next time. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure and check out the description for links to all the products that I used and prefer, as well as a link to a step-by-step written tutorial on my blog. I'll see you next time.